Hey, it's Alex Ratcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is going to be a bit of one of my little angsty self-doubt videos where I talk about what I'm doing and why. It's just part of the process. Thanks for bearing with me. But this one's more specifically is going to be about how I review games and a slight change I'm making going forward and why. And the change I'm making, it's not overly significant, but the change I'm going to be making is going forward in my reviews, I'm going to be adding a score to all of my reviews. Something that I briefly debated doing in the past and have held off on doing, which we'll get into why throughout this video, but I've decided to do because, again, we'll get into why throughout this video. And that's basically it. If none of that's really interesting, I mean, I'll see you tomorrow. Not a big deal at all. This is just, I feel if I'm making a change in how I review things, I would at least like to put out at least one video addressing why and whatever as far as why I'm making that change. And so the problem on the table, the problem I'm trying to fix is a fewfold. The first problem is that most games are good. I put out a video recently of 10 games I would never want to play again, and I really had to struggle to find them because the practical reality is most games are good, or more specifically, most games are good once I personally have self-selected from what's available, meaning it doesn't take a lot to figure out that a game has a complete garbage rulebook, a garbage presentation, has no designer, company, publisher behind it, and you start looking into it more. Once you actually start trying to find good games, most of them are good. It's just that there are good, and there's better, and there's ones that I love, and there's ones that I like, and there's ones that I want to keep, but I have limited time and space, and there's ones that I thought were fine, but weren't for me for reasons or another. But it's pretty rare. It does happen, but it's pretty rare that I don't want to play a game again. That's problem one. And the reason that's a problem is because the inherent struggle then is if I'm putting out a binary, good game, bad game review, which most of my reviews are fairly binary, then it's really hard to appreciate and delve into that nuance. Sure, I can and will continue to tell you whether I am keeping a game in my collection. That will still, I don't want to say always because things could change, but at least as of now, I plan on that always being a part of the video. Meaning, at the end of the day, regardless of the review, regardless of the amazing parts of the game that are this way, the parts I didn't like there, whatever degree of whatever that I go into on a game, I still plan on telling you that whether or not I'm keeping the game, or getting the game as it were, depending if it's a prototype or who knows what, or as well as the fact that it will still continue to show up in my games leaving the collection. As of right now, any game that leaves the collection, it goes into my videos. It's always going to be there, and then again with a why. So you'll see like, oh yeah, I like this one, but it's been 8 months and we haven't pulled out in a while, and I just realized I don't really have a desire to pull out anymore. So you'll always have those updates or whatnot. The second problem is I frequently get questions on my comments or whatnot asking me about my preference for games that in my head the answer is so obvious because I know myself and my tastes, but that is not necessarily being properly conveyed. And so a good example, a very recent example, but a good one, is going to be ISS Vanguard. ISS Vanguard is a game that I loved. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Plan on picking up all of it. Not plan on. I went all in on the campaign. Want it all. Want the miniatures. I plan on delving into the story. Really had a great time. And then I got questions in the comments like, oh, ISS Vanguard or Inis. Or Inish. I believe it's pronounced Inish. I should probably start getting that right. Or ISS Vanguard or Primal. Primal's a recent Kickstarter. And to me, those aren't questions. I'd much rather play Inish. I'd much rather play Primal. I'd much rather play Blood Rage, Chaos in the Old World, a dozen other games over ISS Vanguard. And the reason for that is because ISS Vanguard, while I enjoy it and appreciate it, it's still at the end of the day a narrative game to me. It's a narrative game that has mechanical aspects to it, but that will never compete. For me and my personal tastes, that will never compete with, well, Inish again, or Cyclades, or Kemet, or any of these games. And I got frequent questions about them, ISS Vanguard or Endless Winter. I'd rather Endless Winter. It's not a question to me. It doesn't mean that I don't love ISS Vanguard, but it means that in some way, my appreciation or enjoyment or desire to get a game is not fully being conveyed in a relative aspect compared to where my tastes lie. My hype for the game, my ISS Vanguard is thoroughly enjoyable, and the story that it told, and the aspect that, there was moments of caring. When I had that game with Quackle and he exterminated a civilization, and then he proceeded to make another risk and had a pilot and a lander crash land, and because he couldn't resist the temptation of finding out more, and so people died. That's cool. It's not as cool as drafting a bunch of cards and stomping on a civilization in Blood Rage or Inish, but again, that goes to my personal preference and to what I'm going for. And so that's the second problem there, that I get questions on whether I like games more or not, that to me are fairly obvious. And that those are really going to be the problems on the table. And so I want to be able to convey the nuance of how I feel about games in a way that is not a pure binary, I'm keeping the game, I'm not keeping the game. Sure, I do go into what I liked and don't like. And I thought to some degree that perhaps that carried over how I felt about a game in more detail, but based on the questions I'm getting, the answer seems to be not always. And so let's talk about my own rating system. Well, before we get that, one of the main reasons I have been resistant to using a rating system until now is because the way I rank games on my own personal sheet, I use a software called Notion. It's very similar to Trello to track a whole lot of things in my life. I use them to track anything from the content creation I do to the Kickstarters that are coming up, the late pledges, basically everything I do in my work life, my personal life, all that. I use a software called Notion for. I'll link down to it below. And Notion is, I'm losing train of thought. Notion, in my Notion board, I have my games ranked. And I rank them primarily by just having 5 rankings for my games. And those rankings are going to be, number 1, column 1 is this is a bad game. Those are rare. There's a very, very few games that fit into column 1. And none of them that I own, by the way. I don't own bad games, or at least I don't own games I would rate as bad. Column number 2 is I probably shouldn't own this, but I do. And there's a variety of games that fit into that category, but I'm trying to think of a good example offhand. I don't even want to, I promise I don't want to say a name because that's going to shift the conversation of the video to why I rank that a 2, but I can't think of any offhand. There's a bunch in there, but they usually are going to be games that I have frequently debated getting rid of. Games like, Dice Forge. Dice Forge might be a good example. I own Dice Forge. I still own Dice Forge. I haven't gotten rid of it, but 2s are games I probably shouldn't own, but still do. For one reason or another, they are still in my collection, but I think they're good, and I look at them with skepticism, and I don't really want to keep them, but for some reason I do want to keep them, and they stay in my collection. Those are going to be the 2s. 3s are, this is a solid game. Seven Wonders will be a great example of that. Seven Wonders, which was a game that I loved when I first got into the hobby, has over time migrated to, this is a solid game. I don't love it. I don't have a deep resonated sadness when I think about the idea of never playing it again. If I never played it again, I'd be fine. I've played it quite a bit. And this is going to be a factor that's true of my own personal ratings, by the way. A lot of these are going to be influenced by time. Time will be a relevant factor in a lot of these ratings. Things that I once loved, things that were once 4s and 5s, will shift down to 3s over time. It is a occurrence not with all the games, but many games, because things that are new do wear off sometimes. Other times you have games that have been in my 5s for who knows how long. Number 4 is going to be amazing game. Amazing games, they're great. The idea of not playing them again does make me sad, but also something about them doesn't put them at that epitome of being the best of the best. The best of the best are going to be, well, my top 50, or most of my top 50, I'll explain that in a second, are going to be my top 50 games of all time. The video series I just did is primarily going to consist of my 5s, the best games in my collection. The 4s are just really, really, really good games, and there's a lot of there. There's Empire's Age of Discoveries in there, Dogs of War is in there, Root is in there. Root is climbing, by the way. We'll see where Root ends up next year. But lots of really, really good games are in my 4s, games that I really enjoy, and the idea of never playing them again makes me sad, but they're also not the best of the best to me. And then 5s. 5s are straight up, I love this game, period. And the period doesn't mean there's no flaws. Many games have flaws, most games have flaws, but I don't subscribe to the concept that you can never have a game rated a 10. Because if you can never have a game rated a 10, then the ceiling is actually a 9, and so it just changes the whole system. To me, a 10 is a 10, and that's fine, and a 10 can have flaws, and that's fine too, and that's why you have relative rankings within the scales. Which brings me to the 5s. The 5s are my favorite games, of which, as of right now, I have 41 games in my 5s. Which means my top 50 games of all time, when I ranked them, were the 41 5s, and then 9 from my 4s, because what I do when I'm doing my top 50 list is I completely unorder my entire list, then I reorder them within the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, and then I sort them manually within the 5s and the 4s until I get a result that I'm happy with, and then there's my top 50. And so that basically was my top 50 all time. Mostly games that I absolutely love, adore, and whatever, of which there are 41 games that I consider to be amazing. The idea of living without those games, living stronger, the idea of not having those games in my collection is just horrifying. Horrifying is also a strong word. I'm really attached to board games, I realize. But that's going to be my personal ratings, which I will not use for my public ratings because of a few factors. The first is that my personal ratings often account for things happening over time. And that I don't know how to really account for that in a public rating system. And the fact that something diluted as I played it more is that how do you grade that? I don't really know 100%. Two is I refuse to give a game a 3 out of 5 without having to explain exactly how my ranking system works every single time. I cannot finish a review and be like, this game, blah, 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 and it's going to be a 3 out of 5. And I'll still go into detail, by the way. None of the other detail plans do I plan on having it change. But the idea of calling a game a 3 out of 5, or even a 2 out of 5, I own 2s. I own 2s in my collection that I still think are worthy of keeping, so to speak. But at the end of the day, giving that as a ranking to a game without explaining fully where my system comes from could do harm to a game, to a designer, to a publisher that I do not intend. Because my responsibility, so to speak, the responsibility that I feel I have is I have a responsibility to do no harm. I mean, not as serious as a surgeon, obviously, but to the same general concept, just not nearly as life dramatically altering. And that concept of do no harm is I should not, with my words or careless speech in any way, hurt a publisher or designer or anyone behind a game in a way that is not deserving. The flip side is if I heap unnecessary praise on a game, I'm doing harm to the viewers who are going out and buying a game because I was too nice to someone and I was like, this game's great, I love this game, and I really just think it's okay at best, and I was just too worried about hurting someone. There's people on both sides of the equation that I'm responsible to, and it's always a balance of how to manage that responsibility as fairly as possible. Being overly positive is, easy to be friendly with the publishers that way. Being overly negative, it's easy to build up a fan base around being overly negative because audiences like people being overly negative. Look at him. He's not afraid to trash that game, which is, I am afraid to trash that game. I take the impact very seriously. And so I'm not going to use my personal rating system because even calling something a 3, which is fine for me, might be taken the wrong way. And so sadly, reluctantly, I have to subscribe for the sake of not having to overly explain myself in every single video when I give a rating. I have to subscribe to the 10-point rating system that has become more common in board games. In most systems, by the way, it's actually shifted to a 5-point system for a reason. But in board games, we still use a 10-point system across the board. Almost Board Game Geek uses it. Most of the big channels that use ratings use it. The Dice Tower uses it. I don't think Rahdo uses ratings. Shut Up and Sit Down does approved or not approved. They're more binary. But again, they're pretty harsh about games too, which is something I'm trying not to do. I want to be fair and balanced, and I'm not saying they're not fair and balanced. I should probably, this is where I should edit. I'm not saying they're not fair and balanced. I'm saying that I think the nuance is important. I don't like the binary yes and no. But anyways, the 10-point system is really subscribed to across the board for the most part. And so my 10-point system is going to be pretty simple. 1 through 4 are going to be bad games. Various forms of do not play that game again. And the reason for that is because I think anything below a 5 is viewed by the general population as being do not touch. So 1 to 4s are going to be reserved for that, and you can expect to see very few, if any, of those on the channel. It is generally rare that I will play a game that is anything in that rating system at all. It happens, but it's very much the rarity. And even when it does, and this is part of the thing I have to figure out how to balance as well, even when it does, if I can respect that a game is good and just not for me, I have to figure out how to account for that in my ratings. Number 5. 5 is going to be good games with too many issues, or just an okay game that doesn't really stand out. There are a few 5s. 5 to me is a step below mediocre. Mediocre to me is going to be almost more of a 6. 5s are just like, it's okay. There's things to talk about nicely about the game, but it's really not for me. 6s are going to be like the lower end of games I'm not interested in. Again, this does line up with my personal preference. There are many 6s, many games that are totally fine, but there are things I like about it. I'd play it again, but it wasn't for me. 7s are already going to be my 7 wonders. So 7s are going to be more akin to my 3s in my other system. A 7 is going to be my 7 wonders of the world. My 7 wonders of the world. It's going to be I'm trying to think what other 7s I have in my collection. I don't even know. I'm looking around my shelves over here at my subpar games, which is a weird way of saying things. I have to look it up. Maybe Domain's a 7. There's lots of 7s in my collection. Catan would be a 7. They're solid games. Catan might be a 6, actually. I think Catan would be a 6 for me. But lots of solid games out there that are just not stand out. 8 is where a game starts to excel. 8s are going to be, the 8s, 9s, and 10s are going to correspond to my 4s and 5s. They're going to be, like an 8 will be a game I really enjoyed, highly recommend. 9 would be an amazing game, tons of fun, like seriously amazing. And 10 would just be, I love this game, period. And so I'm going to have to figure out exactly how to rank that out, but it's basically going to be my public rating system is actually going to be different than the one I use privately internally. They're going to be effectively lining up once you extrapolate from it, but it's going to be a little different. And it's just, again, the goal here is to be able to provide nuance. The goal here is that when I say, let's pick two Kickstarter games, Shogun no Katana. Shogun no Katana is a preview I did of a game that I liked, and I'm looking forward to adding to my collection. But it's a 7 for me. It's a game that I like a lot of the puzzle while having concerns about the heaviness and whatnot, and it's a 7. It's a game I'm happy to play, happy to own, and I want to see how it develops over, I played it, I think, 4 or 5, what did I play? I think I played it 4 times, but I want to see how it develops over multiple more plays, and once I have the final game. But that's a 7. Versus Endless Winter, Primal are going to be 10s for me. Isis Vanguard is either an 8 or a 9. I have to put more thought into it before diving into this video. But that's ultimately what the point of this video is I'm trying to solve a problem that's more of a me problem, but it's a problem that I feel, and I'm trying to solve it by using a rating system I don't use myself, which is an interesting conversation. My review process, by the way, as an aside, my review process, just as worth noting while we're talking about this, is I'm more likely to review games I liked than games I didn't like. And that's because of that whole, and I put out a video a long time ago about the nature of reviewing games that you've played a single time. And I believe you can, by the way. I just believe you'll get pushback on it, and I'm not really interested in the pushback. And also the damage part, because if I play a game once, then I'm hesitant to put out a review that might damage somebody if it's a negative review, especially if it's an ecosystem that has fewer reviews. What I mean by that is an established game that comes out, an established published game that is on the market, that there's 30 other reviews for. Me putting out a review saying how much I disliked it, I don't mind as much because the potential damage in relation to the ecosystem as a whole is more minimal. Other opinions exist on but one data point. Versus when I'm one of 3 people who's putting out a review of a game because it's a Kickstarter prototype, and most people don't do reviews, they do previews. So maybe it's like me and Rado who are putting out a review on the game. Suddenly my opinion has more weight because it's a larger data point because there's other people out there who don't. So at that point, I take the whole process in general a lot more seriously. And so in general, I try to avoid reviewing games that I've only played once. In general, it's something I've evolved to more over time, the larger the audience has grown, and the more seriously I take the potential impact of doing so. But I'm also resistant to playing a game I don't like more than once. So that's a balance we'll see. So in general, if I don't like a game, it's probably not going to get reviewed. If I liked a game, then the closer I came to liking it while still deciding, Shadow Network is going to be a good example. The Shadow Network is a game that I liked, I enjoyed it, I see the potential, I can easily recommend it to people, but also not a game for me. Similarly with Pipeline, there are other games out there that I don't mind playing a few times, getting up to the table a few times because I was torn and on the fence, which means most of my reviews are going to be games that either I liked and want to keep, or alternatively games that I liked and was debating where to end up and ended up on the not keeping side. So it's rare that you're going to see me just straight up saying, this game was horrific, I could not stand this, because I just won't play those games. And that's basically it. That's a bit of my review process, things going forward, all that kind of stuff. This video managed to be longer than I intended it. I thought it'd be a very short video. I always think it's a very short video. It does not end up being a short video. And lastly, I'll just note on my table here is Cora Quest. Cora Quest will have a review. I just filmed a review with my daughter today. And we'll have a review going up for the Kickstarter soon, because Cora Quest is delightful. And you should totally back that game. Well, if you have kids and a family situation, you should back the game. I would not recommend it for a bunch of adults unless you are interested. It's not the worst game for adults, but I don't know, I'm going through the review here. I talk about all this stuff in my review. You can watch that when it goes up. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and feedback and comments down below. Let me know. Let me know what you're looking for, not looking for. I just feel that I want that additional context, in my opinion. I don't want it to be simple binary. I don't want to get questions like, did you like Shogun no Katana more than Endless Winter? No, I didn't. I like them both. I want them both in my collection. I didn't like it more than Endless Winter. When I get those questions, I'm always confused by whether I'm being transparent enough in exactly how I feel about a game, as opposed to just coming across as excited all the time. I don't want that binary thing going on. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and have a good one.